Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, we have a couple of the state's leading business folks are going to come on. We're going to talk about the business year in review, business in Pennsylvania in particular. But first, how about this? Criminal justice reform and education. And as they say, let's get to it.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, we have a huge expenditure on corrections, and we have reinvestment in the justice system and why education plays a role. And I'll tell you, it's hard to find a more important topic. And we're going to take it up with the Vice President of the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, otherwise known as APSCUF. And joining me is the Vice President of the aforementioned institution or union, if you will, Dr. Jamie Martin. She's a professor at IUP, Indiana University. I always joke and say, Jimmy Stewart, how can you not know Jimmy Stewart? It was a great actor. And
It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, and he did, and he was born there, and you have a museum out there, so if you ever get to Indiana, PA, go look him up. All right, so let's talk about this relationship between corrections and an investment in education and why that's important. So let's talk about the expenditure side on corrections.
Sure, and I'd maybe give just a little bit of background.
Sure.
I've often told people I spent a lot of time in prisons and jails. Doing research. And what struck me in all of that time is first the number of people we have in those correctional facilities and the amount that we spend on corrections. So I was looking at some recent data. In 2019, there was a study by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and it ranks Pennsylvania 7th in the nation in the number of people that we incarcerate.
7th in the nation. So
about 48,000. We've seen a slight drop in the number of people in prisons. So maybe about 5% over the last 6 or 7 years, but the crime rate's been dropping at a rapid rate, so about 18% in that same time frame, right, down to a low of about 1968 or so. But at that same time, the Department of Corrections budget has increased by 20%. And so at this point, we're spending about $2.6 million on corrections, just on the Department of Corrections in Pennsylvania.
So what's this business called justice? I'll get this right. Justice Reinvestment Policy. Why? First of all, why is it and why is it important?
Well, this is something that Governor Wolf has taken up, and I would really applaud him and then other legislators that are taking the charge on that as well. So the idea is there's been a working group trying to identify issues, concerns with the criminal justice system, including corrections. Identifying those issues and then coming up with solutions to try to save money and then reinvest that in different areas. So some of the areas would be moving people, trying to move people out of corrections into community corrections. I know that Representative Jordan Harris was here a few weeks ago. He talked about some of the parole, probation, hopefully changes there.
Yeah, there are reforms going on, that's correct, that have been accomplished. Go ahead.
And also juvenile justice, so they're looking at a lot of different areas where they can save money and reinvest into the criminal justice system, which again, I applaud. I just wish we'd be investing in other areas as well. Yeah, sure.
Well, there's a relationship between the spending in higher education and criminal justice reform. First of all, let's talk about, and here we're dealing primarily, the state-owned system, 14 universities, is owned by the state of Pennsylvania 100%. But, well, let's run to a break, and we come back. I'm going to talk about the spending on higher education and why that matters when it comes to corrections, and we'll do that in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association. the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
All right, my guest is Dr. Jamie Martin. She's the Vice President of APSCUF. All right, let's talk a little bit about spending on higher education, public higher ed, and why that's important for criminal justice reform.
Sure. So as you mentioned, the state system is Pennsylvania's state-owned universities. So I mentioned the amount we spend on corrections, about $2.6 billion. If you look at what we're spending on higher education, and especially the state system, under Governor Wolf, we have seen slight increases. So at this point, I think our funding is about $468 million. But we're still at a rate lower than we were 10 years ago. And so even though we've seen some movement under Governor Wolf, we haven't recovered from the cuts that Governor Corbett instituted while he was in office. And I'd like to give maybe a broader framework. If you look at the last 3 decades, and I'm going back about that time because I can go back to when I was a student.
I can't remember that far back, but go ahead.
So if you look at that time frame, the last 3 decades or so, corrections expenditures have increased about 114%, while the funding for higher education has decreased by about 50%. And so you can begin to see this tension where, as we had the war against drugs, the war on crime, and all of those kinds of things, we saw a huge increase, the prison explosion.
Right.
When you have one budget pie, you've got to make decisions about where that budget's going to go. And so we've made a decision to really invest it in corrections in the criminal justice system. And so we've seen these draconian cuts in funding for higher education. So that's kind of part of the link. When you start to look at where we rank in the United States in terms of funding for higher ed, we're anywhere from 47th to 50th in the nation. And you almost have to sit and let that wash over you for a minute.
Even though we're one of the larger states.
Right, 50th.
Yeah.
In
wow.
the nation. And so all of these things have led to unbelievable costs for students attending college. The student debt is completely out of control.
And there's been a lot of news. I mean, that's been huge, and the presidential candidates are dealing with that. Go ahead.
Sure. So one of the things that I remember Representative Harris talking about was for individuals on probation and parole, that they could shave some time off of their sentence by getting an associate's degree or bachelor's degree. When I was watching that segment, I thought to myself, how would they afford to go?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think the issue here, or is the point here that you're trying to make, is we have a prison population. It's very expensive. And if some of the folks in prison can pursue a higher education while they're in prison working out some relationship, that would probably make it less likely that they would be freed from a prison and then commit a crime, that they would have prospects for employment. Is this all tied together in that way? Is that the big point?
There certainly can be a reduction in recidivism through education, but I have to ask myself, why are we spending $2.6 billion to incarcerate 48,000 men and women, which is about $42,000 a year, and we're not funding higher education where you could actually prevent crime?
Yeah. See, that's a great point. And now I know I may be biased here as a lifelong, or adult lifelong, I should say, college professor, but go ahead.
Well, you know, I'm a first-generation college student. I didn't come from an affluent family.
Me too.
Right, and so I think if I had been born a generation later, I wouldn't be able to afford to attend IUP or Millersville. And I think about all the students that we're leaving behind.
Right.
And without, you know, what we know is...
So the Justice Reinvestment Program is the relationship between higher education and the criminal justice system in terms of helping to reduce the prison population and to keep people from perhaps committing, you know, having more folks end up in prison. Is that your big point?
That, and I would like to see some legislators become courageous and say we can maybe walk and chew gum at the same time.
Walk and chew gum.
We can fund what we need to in the criminal justice system, but why aren't we also funding higher education?
All right. Well, look, I want to thank you for coming in. I think this is a wonderful topic. Again, given what I've done through my life, I may be biased, but I think overall you can't deny the fact that anything we can do to reduce the folks who serve time in prison, getting them out and helping them find employment, and that's a worthwhile goal. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, we're going to take a look with a couple of important business leaders about what's going on with business in our state. We'll talk about employment. We'll talk about jobs, and as they say, let's get to it.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
All right, we have a very important set of topics to talk about. The business in review, what was business like? We want to talk about what we can expect. We know about the stock market and unemployment and other factors. Joining me to talk about that is Carl Marrara. He's the Vice President of Government Affairs with the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association, and Sam Denisco, do I got that right? I'll use my best Italian for that. Vice President of Governmental Affairs for the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. All right. What was the year like? It looks like in our economy in this state, good. Nationally, good. Take it.
Yeah, what we're hearing from our membership is broad-based, all industries, all sizes, is optimism, growth, investment. A lot of it's pointed right at the economy. A lot of it's due to tax reform at the federal level.
Yeah.
Slightly hesitant to, take that huge leap. We do need to make changes in Pennsylvania from a business climate standpoint. So future years on out,
sure.
Investments can be made. But everything positive currently, and the outlook for the next year seems like it's rocking.
Yep, we're going to get to that. So, the fact is that Pennsylvania's economy, it looks like in the growth, we're slightly below the national average, but we're still doing quite well in almost all the indicators, right?
Well, what we've seen from a national perspective is a strong economy. In Pennsylvania, in the manufacturing sector, we're at over $88 billion in gross state product. Manufacturers are making things, and they're making a lot of them in our Commonwealth, and that's actually up $10 billion over the past decade. But right now, states are going to be competing for investment. We saw the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act at the federal level be the thing that really has spurred the economy, but that's at the national level. So now the states are competing. These companies, these large companies, especially large manufacturers, are bringing their processes back from overseas.
Yeah.
But they need to decide, what state do I want to locate in? And that's why it's so important that Pennsylvania competitiveness is at the forefront of legislators' minds, because we want that investment to happen here rather than in one of our competitor states.
And two of the top, I'd say industries is probably not quite the way to put it, but employment is, we got agriculture and manufacturing.
We do. But workforce still is a major issue for our membership. And
when you talk about
employers.
workforce, you're talking about the fact that in many cases we might have more jobs available than we have people who are qualified to perform them, to do them. Is that an important point?
It's a very important point. What we're seeing is what the term is skills gap, is just that the workforce coming out of high school, community college, the youth is just not prepared to enter the workforce. When I say not prepared to enter the workforce,
talking about specific jobs that are required.
What's there and it's available, because there's jobs that are open. So we're trying to tell the narrative that here's what employers are looking for, and let's get you trained to meet those needs, because often a 4-year degree is not what employers are really looking for these days, and these are family sustaining jobs.
Yeah.
It acts as a hard cap on growth. When you can't find people to hire to either continue your operations or expand your operations, a business can't grow. So at any given moment, we know from our friends at the Manufacturing Institute in Washington, D.C., in Pennsylvania, there are usually around between 6,000 and 7,000 jobs that are vacant on our plant floors. We talk to manufacturers all the time. They would hire a third shift. They would expand their operations, but they can't find the people to do the work. And lawmakers are beginning to take steps. Workforce development is definitely a political buzzword right now, but we need to see more action on that front in order to meet the demands that our members as manufacturers have.
Yeah. Now you would think of all the opportunities that occur, that workforce development in terms of what the state does to promote workforce development, to find the areas where there's job growth and where there's employment opportunities, that there would be more coordination. Now, I know you all in the business community aren't always, you gotta, with the government, I know you can take some hands off on some things and other things you're okay with. Go ahead.
Yeah, what you'll see is a labyrinth of programs through a labyrinth of departments, and it's hard to figure out that maze. So from the private sector standpoint, we're trying to get our members, and they are, to invest in, whether it be a community college program or to just get that word out of what the needs are. But sometimes government can be a little too scattered.
But you have to think the good news is that that the taxes in the state have been relatively stable, meaning there's been no increases. Governor Wolf has not proposed any, except for Marcellus Shale, which we can talk about if you want. But the fact of the matter is we've not had big debates over the sales tax or the income tax
but
or the business tax.
But we haven't done anything to improve our tax situation.
How did I know that you were going to say that?
Pennsylvania is a 9.99 flat rate corporate net income tax.
Right.
Actually, New Jersey just moved ahead of us, but it's either the second or the third largest effective tax rate in the nation. Whenever you look at the business tax structure, we cap net operating loss.
Sure.
There are things that other states are doing, again, to attract that investment that is coming back from overseas.
Right.
But what are we doing in Pennsylvania? I'm not sure. We're not doing enough. And I think that there are some efforts to try to reduce that corporate net income tax of 9.99 to uncap the net operating loss. And those would be huge reforms that would bring all kinds of investment into our Commonwealth, again, rather than to one of our competitor states.
All right, we're going to look ahead. What's going to come up? Is it 2020? Is that coming? I think, when this airs, it's here. We'll be back.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society, inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine, and by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
All right, we're having an important discussion with a couple of the leaders in the business community in the state of Pennsylvania. We did business in review, what happened in 2019, and let's look ahead. And I started with Sam on the first segment. Let's go to you on the second segment. Looking ahead, optimistic, somewhere in between pessimistic. Take it. New year?
I'm optimistic just because of the national trend. And I do, as I said before, think Pennsylvania needs to set itself apart. And I think there's some ways that we can do that. One of the areas where, and you mentioned the additional tax on energy production that the governor has proposed year after year. We need to make sure that that's defeated yet again. But more than that, we need to harness and encourage the growth of the manufacturing sector around energy production in our state. And there's a package of bills that's being led by the Speaker of the House, Mike Turzai, Energize PA, and that's going to be a major priority to us going into 2020, along with workforce, along with tax reform to right-size the corporate tax structure here in Pennsylvania to continue to attract that investment.
Your turn.
Yeah, Carl's hit the nail on the head. Harness our natural resources. How do we grow the industry? What we're going to be watching is the health of the government, if you will. Revenues look strong. Our Commonwealth has to pass a balanced budget to operate. So we're watching that. Is there room to make Pennsylvania's tax code more competitive?
Right.
We talked about this. This will be a recurring theme. Site selectors are going to look at our corporate rate. It's too high. We need to reduce it.
Well, the other aspect of it is that the revenue growth in the state, the revenue projections look like we're taking in more money than we're spending. So it's not likely that when Governor Wolf makes his budget proposal to the legislature, we're going to see any tax increases. He may propose the tax on, it's called the severance tax. That's a tax on the amount of cubic feet that's extracted from these deep wells. It's called fracking natural gas. But it doesn't look like, in terms of the legislature and the governor, that they're going to be substantially at odds about raising taxes anyway.
Well, and the reason I call it a new additional tax on energy production is because we already have an impact fee, which we're the only state that has that. And other states are actually modeling that.
Oh, hold on. The impact fee is a tax that the owners of the natural gas company pay on each of their wells. It's a tax on each well, not on the gas that's extracted from.
Correct.
I wanted to make sure.
But we're the only state that does that. And as we look at how are we going to move forward with this industry, one of the things we have to remember too is the gas coming out of the ground isn't just used for energy. There are materials in that natural gas that are used as feedstock for manufacturing.
Right.
And the activity that could happen from the manufacturing using those products could be bigger than the drilling activity itself.
Right.
And that could really make Pennsylvania a leader, not just amongst the Northeast, not just amongst the United States, but a leader within the world.
But we export natural gas, correct?
Correct.
All right, so you take it. What's your prospects for next year? Well, we're in this year.
The one dynamic we haven't talked about is that it's an election year. So,
oh, really?
Sure. We've heard that. So we're watching that both at the federal level and the state level. We've got the whole state house up, half the Senate. The governor's not up for re-election, so hopefully the revenues are there so everyone can sing Kumbaya like they did last year. And pass a balanced budget. They got to take a look at spending. Welfare spending, if you will, has gone up and it continues to go up. And the governors use supplemental funds to spend there. They're looking at corrections. They're looking at the whole pie. But when you take those two pieces, that's a large part of what we are mandated to spend.
And the one thing, Terry, that you mentioned about with the revenues is that Pennsylvania has almost no reserves. Yes, we have not had major tax increases in the budgets as of recent, but we've also rated pretty much every fund that could possibly be rated, that we really kind of rank amongst the lowest of the states when you look at the reserves that we have. So that's going to be something, if there is an economic downturn for some unforeseen reason, we want to make sure that Pennsylvania continues to have a balanced budget with robust returns to make sure that we're in sound economic footing.
But before I let you go, bottom line here is you expect the job growth to continue in this state, and you're optimistic and you're positive about what this year looks like. No recession in sight?
Not from where we sit, no.
Yeah, we see continued growth, and from what we're hearing from our broad-based membership is that they're continued to investment.
All right, so both positive. Unemployment will remain strong. You're both optimistic about that?
Yes, sir.
All right, well, as always, I want to thank you for coming in, and you'll come back and keep us posted. But you're right, politics and how that's all going to play, but it looks like at the national level, the economy looks good. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, you stay well.